Good afternoon and welcome to the Armchair Monologues from the Problem of Being Awake. My name is Ben, I'll be your host. And this subject is anxiety and anxiety-based disorders. But first I'm going to talk a little bit about emotions, because the more we understand our emotions, the more we can contextualize them, compartmentalize them, and the more self-compassionate we become, more empathetic we become. And the only reason not to want to have a deeper grasp of understanding and therefore being able to compartmentalize your emotions, anyone who thinks they've learned enough or thinks there's nothing left to learn is either taking their last breath or has an ego the size of the sun, because every person can learn and grow skills every day. You can transform yourself in a year to be a completely different person. And this constant educating of the brain is going to lead to longevity of life. That's well proven in scientific studies throughout the last 50 years. And continuous brain stimulation generally leads to better idea and what is essential, which is intellectual fluency. See, it's one thing having an intellect, but if you can't pivot on a spin, if something goes wrong, then you don't have intellectual fluency. So self-development helps with that as well. So the key emotions, there are two key emotions that govern every other emotion. You can probably guess. It's love and it's fear. Now, every emotion stems from one of that. Every action we take comes from an emotional reaction that is either taken out of love or fear. Now, obviously, if everyone is making decisions exclusively out of love, they will not need any assistance with anything like anxiety. And if you are constantly doing that, you should tune off now, because this won't be that relevant for you. But for the 99.99% of other people who have a mixture of emotions at all times, this is useful. So anything that has a good-hearted intention comes from out of love. Now, you've got to not link these to results, because our brain stores, unfortunately, the emotions we had when we made good decisions and bad decisions, but it doesn't necessarily give us the right guidance on the next time round. So it's worth knowing where you're coming from. Obviously, everything anxiety and fear driven is a negative. So examples of a similar state. So you've got loneliness and sadness. They are a love-driven emotion because they are based on an absence of love, and therefore it's a void that needs filling. Isolationism and perfectionism is the exact opposite, and it all comes out of fear. It comes out of fear of what you would do if you go outside, come out of your isolation, and it comes out of fear of what happens if you're not perfect one day. Now, who can hold themselves to that standard? We all have a myriad of emotions. That's the route they come from, but you can investigate everything. I mean, stress is fear-based. Anger is fear-based. Obviously, love, contentment, fulfillment, a feeling of calm, a feeling of faith, for example, that people feel faith emotionally if they are of a faith. And that's the feeling of love. So everything good comes from love, everything bad comes from fear. That doesn't mean you get to avoid any of them. There is no real person who can come completely out of love. Not even Nelson Mandela. He was a very good man, probably the best in 100 years. But not even he would have had mixed emotions, and he would have made decisions based on fear, love, or a mixture of both. And that's what's important to understand, that your reactions and your decisions are generally going to be based on a love-based emotion. If you're a good person, this is. So I assume I'm talking to good people. I hope I am. If you're a good person, your intention will probably start off with a love-based intention, but it might attach a fear-based intention because something similar has been done before. You've tried something similar, or your brain remembers a similar reaction, and it triggers the memory of how you failed at that type of thing last time. And that's how the brain processes emotions. It's curious. Your subconscious brain is curious, and it takes in 15 million bits of information per person per second, compared to your conscious mind taking in only 7. It's the biggest cruise liner of untapped resources and multi-billions of neurons that we are barely scratching the surface of, but it's bigger than any supercomputer that will be designed for 100 years, probably. And it's capable of processing things in nanoseconds. So your thoughts that you have are run through every experience you ever had in your life. Every thought you have has gone through every experience you've ever had since birth. And every the values you have, that when you're young, until you sort of reaching your developing ages, which is more post 21, your kind of brain is sponge-like and accepts all ideas, and then gradually starts to critique them in the late teens to the 21 period, which is why so many kids got indoctrinated, because they were sponge-like and they couldn't contextualize what they were being told, but they store it in what's called the adult box, which is how you watch adults behave as you grow up is how you see adults should behave. That's why many people who have alcoholic parents swear to not drink, and then on their 18th birthday they become an alcoholic. It happens all the time. But coming back to anxiety, because this is really about what is anxiety, how serious is it as a condition? Is it, most people have a mixture, or if they have heightened anxiety or an anxiety disorder or a panic disorder, there'll probably be an element of depression, and likewise vice versa. But if you're an extremely anxious person, and I had a panic disorder, but probably still doing it somewhere in the back of my head. Really heightened general anxiety disorder and complex PTSD. Some things happened to me overseas that were just not on. And I wasn't a soldier. I was helping out in the third world and some corrupt people. Sadists did some bad stuff. So I had to come back, get over my PTSD, and that's what led me to turn my therapy into a PTSD anxiety-based clinic. And what I found with PTSD is the amount I learnt about how emotions can strengthen or weaken is quite vital. And here are some I'm going to give some tools in a minute about ways to combat that, but a lot of them are based on this fact, which is that between your two brain hemispheres, there's something called the line of neuroplasticity. Now, if you stimulate both brain hemispheres, which you can do easily just by tapping on your kneecaps rhythmically, they're not used to going that fast. So any emotional state that you have, and it's perfect if you're really anxious. This is really a great technique to do. You can do this on the train to work. It's great. It just brings you more happiness. And it's fantastic to do if you've got any negative feelings. Because those feelings, imagine them as a little person inside your mind that wants to take root, build a house, extend it, build a swimming pool, a tennis court, eventually a golf course, and an estate. If you make that emotional state cross the divide between the two sides of the mind, left and right, then you make it activates like a swamp. So the little emotion, the fear, whatever it is that you want to get rid of, imagine it having to cross the swamp just to cross back over and cross back over relentlessly until it disappears. What will it do? Eventually it gets tired, and the better you are at the techniques I'm going to describe, the more quickly you can address them and get them to make a massive difference in your constant state of well-being, but also in those heightened anxiety, heightened panic situations. And there's certain things about panic disorders which I'm going to come into next, which needs to be dismissed, because there's some bad science around that, and there's some good science, and I'm going to share the good science and not the bad. So with panic disorders and anxiety disorders, it's very important to know what the difference is, because so many people say they've had panic attacks. Now, my years as a therapist, less than 5% of people who said they'd had them had actually had them. They're not as common as you think. A heightened anxiety attack can feel dreadful, and that's what they had. But a panic attack is very different. I'll describe exactly how. So, just not to minimize anxiety attacks, A heightened anxiety attack is you could easily say it's a panic attack if you don't know better. The difference between the two is one is driven by a fear or an apprehension. And you might not know what it is, but if it's an anxiety disorder, it will have a root, and there'll be a reason for it, and it can be combated much more easily. A panic disorder is when your brain releases physical neurochemicals that make you feel quite paralyzed and quite ill for sometimes a prolonged period of time. There's a myth it can only last a minute. I've had one that lasted 14 hours, and by the end of it, I couldn't recognize my own mother. I was in so much torment because it floods your body with complete and utter toxic, horrible feeling chemicals. You feel like you touch your face, you touch your arms, you don't feel that you're part of your own body, you're dissociated, your brain is going crazy, it's humming, and it's really quite powerful, a major panic attack. A major anxiety attack is less severe, much less severe, but if you haven't experienced it before, you could label it as a panic attack. But heightened anxiety attack is going to have these type of symptoms. It's going to have some sort of tingling sensations and heat-based sensations. So you might get hot flushes, you might start to perspire around the hairline. You might have breathing problems, hyperventilation, or something like that. I've got a great technique for getting rid of that straight away, because it's breathing into a paper bag. That's the wrong thing to do. Things like anxiety and fear and anger, they're based on one side of our nervous system. One is for uptime states, which include happiness and joy, and one's for downtime states, which include contentment and comfort, but also depression and sadness and loneliness and love again is an uptime state. So it's uptime states require more oxygen to sustain themselves. So you require more oxygen to keep being angry than you do to stop being angry. So the breathing exercise that I'll teach it now, very simple, the design is to deprive your body momentarily of oxygen periodically over a short period of breathing. So you breathe in fully, and then you breathe out, and I've been doing this for years, so my out breaths can last a long time, but initially it doesn't matter. The trick is not to hold your breath. You breathe out until your lungs are entirely empty of oxygen. And then you'll get a physical reminder from your lungs that you require oxygen. You don't delay it, you breathe again. So it's not about holding your breath. It's just about expelling all of the oxygen. We generally expel about 70 to 80% and always retain that bit as we're constantly breathing. But in this exercise, it's about having consistent periods where you deprive your body of oxygen until it reminds you that you need it. And then you take another breath. It's not a torturous thing. It's very relaxing. It's fantastic to combat panic and anxiety disorders. It really does work, and it works very quickly. And the more you practice it, the more your brain realizes it works quickly, and the quicker it works. That's true of all therapeutic techniques. The brain will realize what you're doing, and if it's working, it will make it work faster for you. So the more you practice, the better you get. The other thing, stress balls. Now that sounds ironic, obviously, but you can use 2 balled up socks, squeezing them rhythmically like this, so once a second. That simulates your left-right brain hemisphere transfer, which means that if you're feeling anxious and they just need to be soft, squeezable things in your hand, not fruit, obviously. I have professional balls, stress balls that I use. I have professional stress balls that I use, but anything like soft will do, like a balled up pair of socks. You do not, and the more upset, fearful or angry or whatever you get, the more you feel the emotion, the slower you go. And it's not about squeezing hard at all. You don't do that. You've got to commit to the slowness. If you start to feel the emotion more intensely, slow down a bit. Keep your brain guessing and then speed it back up a little bit. But it's just simply a gentle squeeze of whatever object you choose. A balled up pair of socks is a great example. Everyone has one, or everyone has 2 they can get hold of. And you just simply 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, no pressure. And that will do is it will take that feeling in your head and make it cross the swamp irreversibly until it dumbs itself down. I've never taught that to anyone and not had it work for them in 10 minutes in the first try. And by the end of the therapy session, I did with them within 2 minutes. And the same is true of tapping on your knees, which is a lot more of a thing you can do when you're socially anxious, because you can't carry stress balls or balled up socks around with you because you don't want to look nuts. So this actually works. It's the points just above the kneecap where there's flesh, and you just tap rhythmically like that. You don't, and that creates the same thing. The negative state crosses the mental divide of the line of neuroplasticity and loses all of its momentum until it dips down. Now, I always say when you're first trying this, if your state is at 8 out of 10, what you want to be aiming for is like a 4 out of 10. It's not going to go straight from 8 to 0. That takes practice and discipline, but you can expect more from sort of a 5 to 10 in 10 minutes. If you're at an 8, you should first time out be down at a 4 or lower, and 2 weeks in you'll be down, at a 2. It's very effective, and it's extremely powerful for panic and anxiety when it's coursing through your body, and very hard. You need to make sure the discipline's there to do it when it happens, because it's so tempting to be paralyzed by anxiety or panic, because they are kind of devastation of our thinking designed by our brain, our limbic system, the reptilian side, which only understands fight or flight, which is where all these fear mechanisms come from. It floods neurochemicals into your body to make you feel weird, and with anxiety your mind will be racing, and that's the key difference. A heightened anxiety attack will often involve problems with breathing, and feelings of tingling or heat in your body. The opposite is true of panic attacks. It'll be a lack of feeling in your body. So it's like you're alienated, like 2 steps removed from your body. And the thing going on in your head will not feel sort of electric and hot, but it will feel like a really uncomfortable, heavy, dull thud. And, so that's the difference. And the main difference is a panic attack if someone has a panic disorder, it's very serious because it can attack at any time. There never needs to be a predicate for it. That's the key difference. With anxiety, there's always a predicate. If you don't know it, then a bit of soul searching you will find out what made you that way and made you feel that way, but you probably knew it. A panic attack, the few people I've met who've had them similar to me, absolutely 100% qualified, because they described how it actually things, and they never know why. Now, why I would surmise in most people is that it's gone on too long without any intervention, and a disorder has been created, which you'll have to live with. I mean, panic disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. There's nothing stigmatizing now about mental health and mental health disorders when most of Western adults are on medication for some type of mental health since lockdown started. But with anxiety, this line of neuroplasticity is a wonderful thing to use in your brain to stimulate these, and the breathing just allows you to calm yourself down, and it will always work. There's nothing that will stop that unless you don't practice it. But if you, and the great things about these is start practicing them now. If you suffer with anxiety, start getting used to them now. See how they make you feel. You'll feel a difference, and then you'll know that you can employ that and practice that to de-heighten your anxious feelings. Now, it's a difficult world, and it's a digital world, and there's anxiety about things that are very new, and the rise in social anxiety is huge, and it can be absolutely paralyzing. So I'm not saying that anxiety is inferior to panic in terms of being paralyzing and life, dominant. It's just that they're different, and one is rarer, which is the panic disorder. But lots of people now have social anxiety. It's a new phenomenon in terms of the amount of people with that diagnosis, and it's post-lockdown stuff. So a lot of people are suffering, and that's one thing to remember. So I'm going to come back to finish this off with emotions. One thing one more tool. This is why I do these long form things, just in case I forget something, I get to bring it back. A great thing to do if you have any mental health condition, or if you want to brainstorm an idea, or you want inspiration over something, is to record yourself. I've run a voice recording or a video. Pick something irrelevant to talk about for 5 minutes, and your subconscious brain will pick up that you're deliberately talking about something irrelevant, and it won't like that. It will steer you off into tangents, and those tangents will be invaluable to you. If you do half an hour of that, you'll probably get at least 15 minutes of that that's cleared up an issue you've got rid of a problem you've got, or given you an idea you needed. It's wonderful. I call it whispering to the world when the world's not listening. So those techniques. So I would, if you like the balled up socks and it works for you, as I've said, I would invest in some reasonably soft actual stress balls, because it does make a slight difference. There's a little beanbag ones that are very effective in terms of being more effective than socks. But that, just remember, crossing that mental divide. If you've got an anxious or a fearful feeling, make sure it has to cross over that swamp a lot of times, because it just can't have the energy to sustain itself. And try the oxygen thing, because again, it reduces its energy and its possibility of sustaining that emotion, because it's an uptime state and it needs oxygen to burn. So coming back to emotions as a whole, it's a difficult world. It's too digital. There's too little face-to-face contact. There's too little tactility, so tactile responses. Reports are that intimate relationships are down in terms of tactile responses. How many times do you give your wife a kiss or a hug? How many times do you give your children a kiss or a hug? That's all down and needs to be rebuilt. But it's in a world where people's mental health was threatened. It was threatened by lockdown, not by COVID. That was not the thing. Lockdown was the thing that changed people's minds, and it made an epidemic rise in addiction, absolute epidemic rise in alcoholism, because some people were lonely and had nothing to do, and someone who liked a couple of glasses of wine turns into a complete alcoholic, dependent on it. And it's very sad, and we need to bring the world back from that. But understanding your emotions and understanding this concept, you judge yourself by how you think, and you judge everyone else by how they act and behave. Now, how unfair is that? Because how they act and behave is what they want to show you. How they think, very different. Now, we all think bad thoughts, but we wish we didn't. But we don't act on them. So we don't judge, but we judge ourselves on the fact we had the thought in the first place, or we had a collection or a thought process that was incorrect. And that's just being too harsh on yourself. The key to getting over and dealing with depressive anxiety or fear-based disorders is always to persevere and work on yourself. And any type of meditation is good. I'm not going to tell you which one. There's guided ones. The ultimate aim, I'll just say, is to get to a point where you don't need any stimulus to meditate. That's when you've learnt to meditate properly. But there's lots of things online. I don't get into it. I've been meditating for 20 years, so it's I do my own thing. But definitely recommended for anything with anxiety and fear-based stuff, but recommended on the whole for a peaceful life. And just know you're not going to attain peace in life. You can decide not to be stressed. And I've made that decision, conscious of the emotional and the state of stress and how it works. I've made that decision and it's lasted for a few days, but then I have to remake it. And I must have remade that decision 1,000 times. So if you get something right one day, great. If it goes wrong the next day, chalk it up to experience, learn, develop your own emotional intuitive. People who are emotionally intuitive are more articulate about how they feel, not necessarily needing to articulate how they feel, but they're also much more empathetic and much more considerate of other people's feelings and the feelings of society and the general well-being of all things. And then you tend to become more philosophical. The more problems you have to deal with, the more times you get knocked down and get up, the more you grow and you learn as a person. And if you're in your 30s or 40s or in your 20s, you'll look back at all those times and realize what you learned. And it's so important. There's a wonderful phrase, and I'll leave you with this. I've learned so much from my mistakes, I think I need to make a load more. And that is a fantastically witty truism, because we learn by making mistakes and falling down. We do not learn by succeeding and being propped up, which is the current worldview of DEI and all that wokeness, etc. But we gain our character by being knocked down and getting back up. And the more we do it, the stronger the character. That's been my entire life experience. That's, I'm 42. I've been in this life professionally as an adult for a very long time. And that's my experience of life. And one final thing I'll end on is engage with shopkeepers and places where you go every day, like the garage, to fill up the gas. Always just ask them their name or how they're doing for the day, just a simple pleasantry, because you can often find that if you study the videos, some people at the supermarkets don't even get looked at for half an hour. No one speaks to them. So, and the reason you speak to them is because you want to cheer them up slightly. The guy behind you might be having the worst day in his life, and he was going to head back home to have an argument with his wife, which would have caused his wife to divorce him. And the person says, "Hello, sir. How are you today?" And he says, "Not the best, actually." And she says, "I'm sorry to hear that." And then it's not a conversation, although it might, you've got to be open to new conversations, but it might just be that. But the point is, that's calmed that person down. And when I say man, I'm not being sexist, it's woman, man, whatever. But that's calmed the next person down from their possible plight of that day. And what that does is, whenever you're nice and you use good manners and you do things for other people and for their benefit, you will feel an intrinsic benefit, which is a very positive, mutual, transactional benefit of good feelings about yourself and self-esteem. It's very hard to have a present and damaging mental health disorder that's undermanaged if you have high self-esteem. So that's another benchmark. I'll do another video on that. But on terms of anxiety, it's those tools that I've mentioned, and it's that being kind to yourself about what's going on, and also being brave enough to try and do something about it, because there is no point in having any type of mental health disorder, and if you're not going to act on advice or therapy or some medication or a mixture of all three to make your situation improve. So with that, I'll leave you. Always a pleasure to do these long form conversations. And please, anyone ever want any advice on anything mental health, my email address is on my YouTube account and you can get in contact. So I'll leave it there. You be lucky this week. I'll be good, and I'll see you soon.